welcome to the Jayda InStitches show. Autumn is almost here and I feel myself reaching for my shawls and my warm wraps. And it occurred to me that we hadn't yet done a wrap pattern here on the channel. So today I'm going to show you guys how not only to make this wrap, but how to use the pretty feather and fan stitch. A lot of you have requested a tutorial on the feather and fan stitch, so I thought this was a really fun opportunity to teach a pretty stitch, but make something absolutely beautiful and really useful for the cool weather ahead. I've made mine in several different colors. I've got all of my favorite autumn colors here. They remind me of the warm oranges that a setting sun casts on clouds as they pass by a huge full moon. I just love that image. And the waves make me think of the wind in the trees and all those leaves shaking around. And I just think together, I love the cascading colors running down my back. So you can use a whole bunch of different colors for your scarf as well, or you can make them all one big color. So if you've got one beautiful, great big ball of yarn or several that you want to combine into one big wrap, and you have one color in mind, then you can do this in all one color. The beauty of this particular stitch is that it looks really neat striped, but it's beautiful, so it stands on its own. We're going to put a little tiny border on it, just a floating picot stitch, nothing outlandish. We don't want to take away from that really pretty pattern. And you can also wear this wrap as a giant blanket scarf. So blanket scarves are a really trendy thing. I'm sure you've seen them on Pinterest and on the internet. And frequently they're a great big huge square blanket you fold in half. Well, this can be folded in half and wrapped around your neck and tucked in underneath your jacket or over top of your jacket. I have a coat with a big V-neck, so I tuck mine in like this. And it's warm and it's cozy and it'll see you right into the winter months. So without further ado, let's grab our hooks, grab our yarn, head on over to the craft table, and we will make ourselves up this really beautiful feather and fan stitch wrap. For my autumn moon wrap, I'm using 5 of my favorite autumn colors: cream, 2 shades of orange, a nice warm brown, and black. I will probably use around 150 grams per color plus a little extra for my border. In total, you'll want 800 grams approximately of yarn for this project. I'm using acrylic worsted weight yarn size 4. You can also use DK if that's available to you. You're going to need a pair of scissors, a yarn needle, and the hook today is a size 6mm or a J. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. This feather and fan stitch pattern can be worked across any multiple of 19 stitches plus 1 extra turning chain. For today's wrap project, we're going to begin with a slip knot, and we're going to chain 172. That's 172 chains. Once you've chained 172 chains, make sure you've got 172, so give it a second count. We're going to begin by skipping the first chain, that's our turning chain, and we're going to half double crochet into the very next chain and half double crochet into each chain across. So row 1 and every odd row of this pattern will be a half double crochet row. You will always have 171 stitches at the end of each row. So go ahead, half double crochet in every single chain all the way to the end, and I'll catch up with you there. At the end of row 1 and every odd row, you will have 171 half double crochet stitches. Turn your work. And now row 2 and every even row is where we work our pretty little fans and feathers pattern. The fans and feathers are worked over a sequence of 19 stitches. Every 19 stitches, this pattern repeats. Every 19 stitch sequence begins with a half a fan, it flows into a feathered valley, and finishes with a half a fan. Immediately next to that begins another half a fan, which flows into a feathered valley and ends with half a fan. So every 19 stitches, this is the shape you should see. We're using the treble crochet stitch. So to begin, we need to get up to the height of a treble crochet. Every row 2 or even row begins with a chain 5. this chain 5 counts as a treble crochet chain 1. So when you get back to the end of an odd row and you come up to your chain 5, remember that it counts as a treble crochet chain 1. Very important. Into the same stitch, so the same stitch that our treble crochet or that our chains have come out of, we're going to work the rest of the fan. Treble crochet, chain 1, treble crochet, chain 1, treble crochet. Every half fan, no matter what side of the 19 stitch sequence it is on, consists of a treble crochet, chain 1, treble crochet, chain 1, treble crochet, chain 1, treble crochet. So 4 treble crochets separated by chain 1s. Do not chain 1 after a fan. Now we're going to do the feathery part. Skip 2 stitches, find the 3rd, and treble crochet. Skip 2 stitches, find the 3rd, and treble crochet. Skip 2 stitches, find the 3rd, and treble crochet. Skip 2 stitches, find the 3rd, and treble crochet. Skip 2 stitches, find the 3rd, and treble crochet. This is the feather part. After a fan, skip 2 stitches, and then treble crochet, skip 2, treble crochet, skip 2, 5 times. You should have 5 treble crochets separated by 2 skipped stitches each. After the feathered part, we jump right back into another half a fan. We skip 2 stitches, find the next stitch, and work a half fan. That is treble crochet, chain 1, treble crochet, chain 1, treble crochet, chain 1, treble crochet. And that is the entire 19 stitch repeating sequence. We begin with a half fan, skip 2 stitches, treble 5 times, skip 2 stitches, and finish another half fan. Every half fan is treble, chain, treble, chain, treble, chain, treble. Now we begin that 19 stitch sequence all over again. Into the immediate next stitch, work a half fan. After your half fan, skip 2 stitches and treble crochet 5 times. After your 5 treble crochet skip 2s, skip 2 stitches and work a half fan. That is the pattern over 19 stitches repeated twice. Half a fan into some feathers, half a fan. Half a fan into some feathers, half a fan. You're going to repeat this 19 stitch sequence again and again all the way across, and you're going to end with a half a fan. I will see you at the end of row 2. As you get to the end of row 2, or any even row, after you finish your 5 treble skip 2s, skip 2 more stitches, and that should leave you with 1 stitch left. Work a half fan, and you're done the row. You will still have 171 stitches. Don't forget that the chains in between your treble crochets in a fan count as a stitch. So a half fan is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches. Each of your treble crochets throughout your little feathery bit only count as 1 stitch, and you can count them across the top. Just because you're skipping stitches down here doesn't change the stitch count across the top. You should have, bumper to bumper, 19 stitches in total between half fan number 1 and half fan number 2. The whole row will be 171 stitches, and that number should remain constant throughout. At the end of every even row, chain 1, turn your work, and half double crochet in every stitch and chain back through the row. So you can pick up a stitch fairly easily But if picking up the chain or working the chain is too difficult, then you can just use the whole space. But make sure that you don't accidentally put a space in between the treble crochets in your fan bit. Use the stitches. So be very careful to work the space if you can't work the chain, but make sure you get every single stitch. And if it helps to count in sets of 19, then work sets of 19, and when you get to the middle, between two fan stitches, so there's a fan and there's a fan, you should be at 19 when you get to the very end of that last stitch. So go ahead, half double crochet in every stitch and chain, or space if you can't work the actual chain, and I'll see you at the end. When you come up on the end of row 2 or any even row, don't forget about your chain 5. Remember that your chain 5 that started that row counted as a treble crochet and a chain 1. So when you're completing an odd row across an even row, remember to half double crochet in the chain 1 or the space and half double crochet in the top of the chain 4, which is the equivalent of a treble crochet. And those two stitches, so one in the chain 5 and one in the chain 4, or what would usually translate as a half double crochet in the chain 1 space and a half double crochet in the top of a treble, completes those 19 extra stitches in that last set. So you should have 171 stitches at the end of row 3 or every odd row, and at the end of row 2 or every even row. You can chain 5 before you turn, or turn and then chain 5, whichever you like. And you can start your fans and feathers all over again. Remember that that chain 5 counts as a treble crochet chain 1, and then into the same stitch that those chains came out of, you're going to treble crochet chain 1, treble crochet chain 1, and treble crochet. So every half fan consists of 4 treble crochets separated by a chain 1. Do not chain 1, leaving a fan. Skip 2 stitches and go directly into your treble crochet feathers. It's the same little pattern all the way across as for row 2. Every even row is like this, and every odd row is a half double crochet row. So I'm going to let you guys work the pattern on your own back and forth for a little while, and I'll check in with you at the end of row 6 because I'm going to change colors. I've now completed 6 rows of my pattern. Every odd row is a half double crochet row, and every even row is the fans and feathers. Your fans and feathers should all line up on top of each other. So all your feathered valleys line up, and all your fanned sort of peaks line up. At the end of 6 rows, I'm going to change color, so I've trimmed my yarn. I'm just going to fasten right off. I finished my last fan there. I'm going to flip my work, and I'm going to grab my next color, which is this lovely bright orange. I'm going to begin with a slip knot, and I'm going to join in the same stitch that I fastened off with. So there's my little fasten off knot, and this is the stitch that I'm joining my yarn in. I'm going to work over my short tails as I go, but of course you can always weave yours in later if that's what you're more comfortable with. Because I'm joining my yarn, I want to chain 1 as though I never did change my yarn, because that's my turning chain, and that brings me up to about the height of a half double crochet. For the purpose of this pattern, I'm using chain 1s as a half double crochet turning chain. So I've joined my yarn in the same stitch, chained 1, I'm going to half double crochet into the same stitch, and now I'm off to the races. Everything is the same from here on out. I'm going to half double crochet in each stitch and chain space all the way across for this odd row, and then I'm going to repeat the pattern for another 6 rows in total in this color, and then I'm going to change colors again. I'm going to change colors 5 times in total, which will be 30 rows by the time I'm finished, but I'm going to add 1 extra row at the very end of half double crochet, so 31 rows in total before I start to work my border. So if you guys are changing colors, that's how you do it. If you're working it in all one color, you can just work 31 rows in total of this pattern stitch, and I'll see you near the end. I have finished working
31 rows in total of my wrap pattern, and I ended on an odd row, which is a half double crochet row. Now it's a little difficult to see because I ended on the color black, and I've also gone ahead and added a border. I bordered the entire thing in black because I wanted that lovely sharp contrast, and it's a very simple little border, but because I used black, I'm going to show you on a different, smaller sample of this pattern how to put the border on. When you're finished your pattern and you want to end on an odd row, which is a half double crochet row, if you're going to use the same color, don't fasten off. If you are going to change colors, you can fasten off here and then rejoin your yarn with a slip stitch in the same stitch, this one right here. But everything after that is the same. So we're going to turn our work so that we're working down the first raw edge. And if you want to take a moment to weave in your little short tails, I advise you do that. We're going to work down the raw edge first, and I want you to take a look down that raw edge and identify all the little spaces where a chain 5 comes out of. So you should see these nice round little circles that chain 5s come out of. This is technically the top of a half double crochet, so this is the edge of a half double crochet row, but it's this little sort of circular thing that happens because we've worked a fan into it, so there's a hole that's shown up. This is how you work the little pattern of the border. You're going to chain 6, slip stitch into the 4th chain from the hook, so count backwards, 4, slip stitch into that chain, chain 2 more, find that little hole that your fan was worked into, and slip stitch into it. And that creates this really cute little floating picot. I'm going to show you that again. We're going to chain 6, find the 4th chain from the hook and slip stitch into it, chain 2 more, find that next space or that bigger sort of stitch that fan was worked into and slip stitch into it. And you get this lovely little floating picot thing. Once more. Chain 6, slip stitch into the 4th chain from the hook, chain 2 more, and when you get to the bottom, you're going to slip stitch into that other hole. You should find a nice big round space near the bottom, and then and you're only going to do this on the first side, slip stitch into that first chain, and you may still see your little short tail there. Slip stitch into that first chain, and that completes the raw edge, the first raw edge. In the bottom corner chain, you're going to chain 3 and slip stitch into the same stitch. So you kind of create like a little tiny wee picot right on the very corner. Now working across the bottom of our pattern, it's a little bit different. We're going to start by making a floating picot. So chain 6, find the 4th chain from the hook and slip stitch into it, chain 2 more, and you're going to skip over 1, 2, 3 stitches, find the 4th, so it's kind of, you have to look for these are chains that we're looking at. Find the 4th one and slip stitch into it. And here's where it changes for the rest of the pattern. So that was just sort of coming out of the corner, but over across 19 stitches, so remember our pattern works across 19 stitches, so every 19 stitches will typically look like you work a floating picot, skip 4 chains, and slip stitch into the 5th, and you do that 3 times. So you work a floating picot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, chain 2, skip 4 chains, find the 5th, and slip stitch into it. Do it again. skip 4 chains, find the 5th, and slip stitch into it. When you get to near the end of the 19 stitch repeater, create your last floating picot for that little 19 stitch segment, and only skip 4 stitches, I should say 3 stitches this time. 1, 2, 3, find the 4th, and slip stitch into it. So heading up and over the curve, you make a floating picot, skip 4 chains, slip stitch into the 5th. Floating picot, skip 4 chains, slip stitch into the 5th. Floating picot, skip 4 chains, slip stitch into the 5th. Floating picot, skip 4 chains, 3 chains, sorry, single or slip stitch into the 4th. So you float a picot, skip 4 3 times, and then for the last one in that 19 stitch set, make a floating picot, skip 3 chains, and slip stitch into the 4th. And I'm just going to continue that across the bottom here of my little sampler, and I'll catch up with you at the other corner. When you get to the end of going across the bottom of your work, you're going to create your floating picot, skip 3 chains, and find the last one, which would be the very corner one, slip stitch into that, and then create another little picot in the same place. So chain 3, this is our little corner picot, and just slip stitch into the same place. Now you're going up the other edge, and it's exactly the same thing as you did in the first edge. So we're going to slip stitch into that sort of bigger space to start with, just to get us up into it, and then start your floating picots and skip up until you find the next round one. So it might be a little, you're looking at it a little bit differently going up. So there's your half double crochet row. Here's the fan that was worked into the top of a half double crochet, so you might have to pull it a little bit to see it, but there it is. And then you just work the exact same thing going all the way up the other side. Skip up, find the other half double crochet that the fan is worked into, so there it is right there. That's where the next floating picot will be anchored. And then you're going to get all the way up to the top, and I'll catch up with you there. Once you get all the way back up the other raw edge to the top, or the last row that you made, make your last floating picot and anchor it in the top of the stitch of the last row, and then create a little picot in that same stitch. So chain 3, slip stitch right into the same stitch. There's a little corner picot. So that's your other raw edge finished. And then you're going to repeat the same thing running across the top that you did across the bottom. So the first floating picot is a little bit different because, or I should say the count's a little bit different, just because we're using the stitch. We're using the stitch instead of skipping over top of it. So leaving the first time, you're going to skip 3 stitches and then slip stitch into the next one. But then that pattern of create a floating picot, skip 4 stitches, find the 5th, create a floating picot, skip 4 stitches, find the 5th, and then on the last one, create a floating picot, skip 3 stitches, and end up on the 4th. And that one should always put you pretty much right on top of the edge of a fan. So remember I showed you that little diagram? The 19 stitch count segment ends on a half a fan, and your last, that's sort of 4 floating picots that you're working across a 19 stitch repeater, the last one should always be anchored directly on top of the end of a half fan, so right up there. And that's all you have to do across the top. So I'll let you work on that, and I'll catch up with you at the end. When you come across the last row making your little floating picots, the last thing you should do is only skip 3, and the last place to anchor a floating picot should be pretty much the same place that your floating picot started from. So anchor in that 4th stitch, and then create a little corner picot by chaining 3 and slip stitching back into place. And that's what your little floating picot border looks like running across the top. Then you just snip your yarn, fasten off, weave in your ends, and I highly recommend that you block.
And there you have it. One lovely feather and fan stitch wrap, perfect for the cool autumn weather ahead, and absolutely gorgeous. You can make it in any series of colors to match your favorite outfit, or one solid color to match your jacket for the fall. And that's it for this week, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed making this along with me. I know I had a lot of fun doing it. And if you've got pictures, I'd love to see them. You can share pictures with us on Instagram, Google+, or even Pinterest. We're at Jayda InStitches in all 3 locations. And that's it. We'll see you soon on the Jayda InStitches show for more stitchy fun. Until then, stay safe, stay cozy, have an awesome week, and we'll see you soon. Bye!